We're looking at love that is hospitable. Again, if you're new this morning, let me briefly kind of walk through these 4 Sundays of September. We're looking at loving people authentically from our mission statement and using 4 different stories on those 4 Sundays to talk about specifically towards 4 groups of people. Last week we looked at family and friends. This week we're going to talk about extending that love to our neighbors and our community. But I also want to remind you, I don't think I said it last week, that all of our children and our youth are learning from the same Bible story, okay? And so the reminder to that, 2 things. One is ask your kids, hey, what'd you learn today? Because you're learning on the same topic, right? And so what did you learn? And then maybe share with them a couple of the points that you took from it today. And so we want that kind of interaction to be able to take place with our kids since we're doing it at the same time. Last week, we looked at sacrificial love. We looked at 4 things just to remind you. Sacrificial love makes a choice. Sacrificial love makes a way. Sacrificial love takes risks. And sacrificial love is seen by Jesus whenever we do that. And so our second is authentic love that is hospitable. We'll be highlighting the phrase in the story of Jesus feeding of the 5,000. So that's our storyline for this morning, feeding the 5,000. But specifically, we're looking at when Jesus said, you feed them. You feed them. And it's this connection that we have with our God in helping others, Him through us. You feed them. And so we'll talk about that story a little bit up front. The memory verse for this week, if you want extra points, is Matthew 22:39. It's pretty easy, and it is love your neighbor as yourself. Can we do that one together? Love your neighbor as yourself. You guys are doing good so far. All right. Hey, and this Wednesday night, so we're taking 4 Old Testament on the Wednesday nights. This Wednesday night, I'm going to be sharing on the great story of David showing hospitality to Saul, King Saul's grandson, Mephibosheth. Not easy to say, but that's what we're going to be talking about, Mephibosheth. And really what David did in showing this hospitality at a 2 Samuel 9 is a great, great story. It's going to be real fun. So let's talk about hospitality as we step into the New Testament. Jesus urged hospitality to be extended beyond the confines of home and tribe. A lot of times we think of hospitality, we think about having a few friends over for dinner. It's not hospitality. I'll explain why later. But as illustrated in the parables of the night visitor, guy knocks on his door. We just passed that up in Luke chapter 11 just a few weeks back. And so it's a next door neighbor that you don't know too well, but he's bugging you in the middle of the night for bread. And so it was illustrated there, and also with the Good Samaritan back in Luke chapter 10, that he didn't know the Samaritan guy that had gotten beat up on the street, but he helped him. It's hospitality. Ministering to the needy is clearly expected by God, as made evident in Jesus' instruction regarding the judgment of the nations. Over in Matthew 25, it's a popular one about feeding the hungry, quenching the thirsty, welcoming the stranger, clothing the naked, caring for the sick, and visiting those that are imprisoned. And there's this practical thing that was, as he laid it out in such detail there, of ways in which we can reach out with love and touch others that are around us. Failure to offer hospitality incurs judgment. When he tells the story in Luke chapter 16 of the rich man and Lazarus, it's after they both died and gone to their eternal places. And the rich man in Hades is talking, having this conversation with Abraham. And in that conversation, it's how he treated the beggar that was outside of his front door, in that he didn't ever treat him nicely. And now he's going to be paying for it. And the beggar that had a terrible life, very difficult life on this planet, is now in eternity with God. And so it talks about that judgment being incurred. Jesus scolded Simon the Pharisee for being a poor host. He says, you gave me no water for my feet, no greeting with a kiss, no oil for anointing my head, out of Luke chapter 7. And so our story this morning, as I mentioned, we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 14, 13 through 21. And in this, before I read the teaching of the 5,000, remember, it's got to be important if it's the only miracle in all 4 Gospels. besides the resurrection. So setting the resurrection aside, all four Gospels give it plenty of space at the end of their Gospels, but this is the only one out of all the different miracles in all four Gospels. And so I think there's a lot there. Now, we just taught on this back in June as we covered it in Luke chapter 9. So with that, I'm not going to try to expand the whole entire story. I'm going to go right into what we're talking about in Authentic Love, shows hospitality. All right, let's read this. Matthew 14, starting in 13. Now when Jesus heard this, the this was right before that, the beheading, the brutal beheading of John the Baptist. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. And when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. And then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So this morning's focus I put on, I highlighted behind me or boldened them, these 2 statements. You give them something to eat, and bring them here to me. This is what needs to take place. You feed them. You feed them. Bring them here to me. How can it happen if we bring them to Jesus? This is this mini picture, I think a mini picture of Jesus's hospitality for the crowd. So many times in the Gospels, we see Jesus as a host or as a guest. And even at the end of the Gospels, we even see him as the meal, the Passover lamb, right? And so he lived hospitality. It was about being hospitable. This idea, their first idea is send them away. And so they're telling Jesus, here's what you ought to do. Let us advise you on what you should do in a tough situation like this. Send them all away. It's getting dark. There's no place to eat right nearby, so let them go so they can get off to the other villages and to be able to eat. But I think Jesus teaches never send anyone away who is hungry spiritually, hungry emotionally, hungry physically. Take care of them. And Jesus will give us seemingly impossible challenges. You give them something to eat. May this be written on every church. May this be written on every believer's heart, that we have the bread that satisfies. You give them something to eat. Please don't hear, as we read the storyline, them. This is for us today. You give them something to eat. You have the bread that satisfies, Jesus himself. And so we asked, back at the time when we were looking at this a couple months back, I asked the question, who fed them, Jesus or the disciples? And we had said that the answer, of course, was yes. They both did. Both. See, the disciples showed hospitable behavior, but only because of God's help. They're the one who did all the distribution. They passed out on the food. They were helping all of these people because of what Jesus was doing. So it's teamwork. And so the story reminds us of how inadequate we are in ourselves. We would have that same thing, send them away. That'd be the best way to do it. But the story reminds us of how inadequate we are, but how adequate God is. Because he gives them the answer, bring them here to me. That's our one job, pretty simple. That's our one job, bring them to Jesus. And so we blessed and broke these loaves and fish and started passing them out. And we realized from that, we're not the manufacturers. We're simply just the distributors. The miracle took place in Jesus' hands, not in theirs. And so Jesus didn't only feed the 5,000, but he also taught the 12 a very important lesson and even sends them away with doggy bag reminders, right? And so they had leftovers that they get to take home, and so they had to think about it all the way home, right? Instead of telling Jesus what to do, let him bring you back into a place of service as waiters. The story about dependence on God with resources. This is the God we serve. This is the God that we make much of when it comes to hospitality. So Jesus didn't come just to give bread, but to be bread. And I was thinking of that statement, and I thought, and we were not left here to do hospitable things. Please don't only hear that this morning, but to be hospitality. That it wasn't that, I remember a few months back, I did such and such. Great. What we're talking about is being hospitable. I was listening to, I was done with all my notes, and I'm driving home last night, and I was just excited about the topic, and where did I put it? Here it is. And so I was listening to John Mark Comer, teaching he did. I love his teaching. And he had said, how did Jesus walk so many people into the kingdom? One meal at a time. The Gospels are just packed with sitting down and meals. And it wasn't his buddies. It wasn't eating with the 12. It was the prostitutes. It was the tax collectors. It was the offscouring of life, at the time, those that were hurting, or the bottom of the barrel, as we'd call it. And that's who he loved to be able to eat with. And he was peopling eternity is what he was all about in doing that. And I heard that quote last night. And it's like, yes, that is so good. All right. What is love that is hospitable? I like at the very top there, this definition that Bethany Jenkins said. She said, hospitality is both an attitude of the heart and also a practice of the hand. I like that. I like when somebody can take it and make it so succinct like that. So all throughout Scripture, matter of fact, all the way back in Deuteronomy, God calls his people to show hospitality, to strangers. And in Deuteronomy 10, 18, and 19, he specifically defines out the strangers, orphans, foreigners, the poor, the widows, and more. Those that are hurting, those you don't know. Outside of family and friends, it's them. It's the neighbor, it could be right next door that you don't know. That's a stranger. That they fit into that category there. And so hospitality itself, it means love of strangers. Pretty simple. Or fond of strangers, which makes it even more maybe sensitive. Not love of friends. That's something different. That's Philadelphia, brotherly love, right? Philadelphia, brotherly love. But this is Philoxenian, right? That's your Greek term for the day, Philoxenian, which we have that Xenian. Matter of fact, as we talk about 9/11, or we prayed this morning, xenophobia. It was the first time I had heard that was right after 9/11, of xenophobia. And I saw it in the news, and whenever I say a word I don't know, as my English teacher taught me, look it up. Always look it up. I am so glad for the dictionary on the phone. I use it so much, right? And so with that, what is xenophobia? And so there it is, the fear or the hatred towards strangers. And at the time, it was Muslims. We weren't talking much about that in the day, not just all Muslims, but radicalized Muslims at the day. And there was this xenophobia. We didn't know who they were, what they were about. Are they coming to get us again? And with all of those fears, and rightfully so, back in the early 2000s, and looking at that. And so with that, then, hospitality is the exact opposite of xenophobia, even in the wording that we have there. It seeks to turn strangers into friends through the acts of welcome and generosity. I'll give you 3 kind of quotes that'll help us in understanding this love of strangers. The second one you see behind me there from Rosaria Butterfield. We're going to talk about her at the end of the message. Turning strangers into neighbors and neighbors into family. I like that. John Mark Comer that I mentioned earlier, expressing the welcome of God the Father to all through tangible acts of love, namely through giving food, shelter, and relationship. Now, I want to tie in 3 scriptures that are maybe the most used when it comes to hospitality. And the first one here in Romans 12 in verse 13, and I grabbed it out of the New Living Translation because it took this one phrase. It's actually only 2 words in the Greek. Always be eager to practice. That's really 1 word in the Greek. hospitality. So a lot of the translation, it'll just say practice hospitality, but this really gives it's more than just practice it, because that could be practice it once, but it's definitely in the imperative to where, and it's constant in our lives. Always be eager to practice hospitality, I think, is the best translation, but understand it is a command. Now, we usually dismiss hospitality off because there's one that talks about it being a gift, and in fact it is. But faith is also a gift, but it's like radical faith, like Elijah calling fire down from heaven kind of faith, right? It's a gift, and so some have it that way, but it doesn't mean, okay, only those that have the gift of faith can have faith, right? We all have faith. We have salvific or salvation faith, right? But with this is a command. And it's interesting in Romans 12, you kind of look before it and after it, which is always good to do in context. But in that, it pops up in a list that starts with, let your love be genuine. Now it's going to give kind of ways how your love can be genuine right under that. Part of that is practicing hospitality. And then it ends with, in chapter 12, verse 21, don't become overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. Overcome evil with good. And so it's kind of sandwiched in between there. But this always be eager to practice, to do something with intense effort and with definite purpose or goal. That's good. But that's the intensity behind that word practice that's there. To do something with intense effort, with a definite purpose or goal, where we're going to be hospitable, we're going to live hospitably, towards those strangers that are around us. And we'll give some practicals in a little bit. The second one you see behind me in the middle there, 1 Peter 4, 8 through 10. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. And now we ask, how do we do that? And then he answers, offer hospitality to one another. And now for all of us introverts and neat freaks, he says, without grumbling, okay? And so sometimes that gets messy as you help out others, you're hospitable to others. The third one is Hebrews 13:2, and it says, keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. Do not forget to show, I like this, hospitality to strangers, which is really redundant in English, because hospitality is love to strangers. And I specifically looked at that, and there's only that one word there, that Philoxenian that we had. That was the word that is there, but interesting that it spells it out. Maybe because in our English, it's hospitality to a family member, to our best friends, as we have them over for dinner, and we've kind of watered down the word and kind of taken it away from hospitality to strangers. Now, we should be nice to our families and to our best friends. Okay, so that's all good. There's other scriptures to be able to do that. That's, again, that brotherly love. I'm not saying don't do that, but specifically here, it's hospitality to strangers. For by doing so, some people will have shown hospitality or entertained angels without knowing it. So, let me say a couple of things here. Love that is hospitable isn't these two things, because this is where I think it gets mixed up a lot. It is not, I already said, dinner with friends. That's called dinner with friends, okay? That's not hospitality, that's dinner with friends. Good to do, I like it. I love just yakking it up and people that you're comfortable and you just have fun with, laugh and everything else, and maybe takes away, it's not awkward or whatever. Again, hospitality is love or welcoming of a stranger. And secondly, it's not gender specific. So guys, let me speak to you for a second, because a lot of times we men hear hospitality and we think, and we nod it off and say, yeah, my wife's really good at that. And it just bounced right off me, right? I don't have to deal with that. We think Martha Stewart. We think good housekeeping. We think someone else. We think maybe it's feminine. No. It is a command. It is an imperative. It's a command, and it's for every Christian, okay? Have everybody's attention. So how do we show hospitality today? It's not complicated, though that doesn't mean it's easy. But we're going to look at 4 ways real quick. Love that is hospitable is, and we're going to look at home hospitality, work hospitality, costly hospitality, and gospel hospitality. Ready? Buckle up. Here we go. Brian just speaks faster to get all his words in time. Home hospitality. This may look like hosting a small group in your home. I want to say thank you to all those that opened up their homes for our Operation Unity, the very thing that we're talking about this morning, and being a group facilitator. Thank you. Sure, some of your friends might have signed up for your home because they know you. That's normal. I'm kind of the same way as an introvert. I like doing the same thing. But it was also open on the church app, and you don't know who's going to show up. It could be that weird guy on the other side of the church that's going to be. But anyways, you did that, and that takes risks, and you opened up to strangers, meaning other people in the church that you don't know and don't have relationship. And so I say, thank you. It may look like inviting a neighbor to dinner that you don't know very well, listening to a friend over coffee. Of course, these things can be done in your home, but as I'm talking about home hospitality, but home isn't always the most optimal place to be able to meet with someone, especially if you live in a dorm or small apartment or live with listening ears within your house. And so in this section, we're referring to that private sphere of your life. So whether down the street at Rival Coffee, meeting somebody there, or a restaurant in town, or a park bench, the point is that in that private sphere of your life, how are you doing in this area? The Bible time and time again talks about the holiness of eating together. I like this quote: long dinners with good food, good drink, good company, and good conversations that center around our beliefs, hopes, and fears. That's a good dinner. I like that. I personally think the highest form of home hospitality is fostering or adopting or working with the different groups like Safe Families. Third service, we get to do the baby dedication for Maggie, Pastor Andrew, and Madeline's little girl, and looking forward to doing that. But it's just like so proud of those guys, so beautiful. The reason I say it's the highest form of home hospitality, because you're bringing in a stranger, not just to spend the night in your house, not just to move in, but to move into your private life, into your private space, to move into your family, to become part of your family. It's choosing to turn a stranger into a friend and then into a family member that we quoted earlier, through acts of welcome and generosity and the love of Jesus. In Luke chapter 14, starting in verse 12, then he, Jesus, turning to his hosts, when you put on a luncheon or a banquet, he said, don't invite your friends, brothers, relatives, and rich neighbors, for, he's going to tell us why, they'll invite you back, and then that'll be your only reward. And so you get a good dinner out of it, but, it's dinner for dinner kind of thing. Verse 13, he says, instead, listen to the list, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Then at the resurrection of the righteous, God will reward you for inviting those who could not repay you. See, Jesus sets up ordinary hospitality with eternal ramifications. What we do here matters there, is what's happening here. And so parents that are fostering and adopting, hold on to this when you're experiencing ingratitude with your kids. We have a number of families that have brought in teenagers into their home to foster them, and they're not always the most thankful. Now you're helping them out, you're doing this, you're providing for them and a number of things, but a lot of times that could be ingratitude, but why you're doing it. Then at the resurrection of the righteous, God will reward you for inviting those who could not repay you into your home. He sees, he knows, he rewards. Secondly, work hospitality. Listen to this quote. Well, you can see it behind me there. 80% of American office workers don't take regular lunch breaks. Instead, we eat alone at our desk in just 15 minutes. This trend is so common that social scientists have a name for it: desktop dining. So maybe hospitality looks like eating together in the company break room if you work in an office environment there. One study of firehouses found more cooperative behavior and better performance when firefighters eat together. Then Brian Wansink said, you like your job more and you'll like your colleagues better. We'll give other examples of that, or maybe it's inviting someone you don't know very well out for lunch at work. We're talking about work environment. Maybe it's leaving your office door open, showing that you don't mind interruptions. Maybe it's inviting somebody you don't know very well to a morning or afternoon coffee run. Those are awesome. Maybe it's inviting some of your work friends to hang out with your church friends. I saw Steve Nicholas, if you know Steve, very involved with the men's ministry. He did that at our grill and chill. First guy I walked up to, he was standing over by the water fountain, kind of just standing up against the wall by himself. And I went over there, introduced myself to him, and I saw his shirt where he worked at, and one of the dealerships over in Temecula. And so I figured it would be a friend of Steve's. And sure enough, as I'm introducing myself, and I said, "So, it was the first time here?" And he says, "Yeah, my friend Steve invited me." I said, "Oh, Steve Nicholson," and he's very good at doing that. And so it's kind of weaving those two in, some that you know, friends that you know, and in here for church, and you bring out other friends and you invite them in. It's beautiful. Maybe it's planning a meal schedule for a non-believer at work, like we do all the time here at church. We do it. We have this beautiful community. I've met people that have come to our church specifically not about Jesus because they don't know any better, and simply I'm just looking. I was looking for like a club to join, and I just thought, why not a church? They're usually pretty good people there, and I said, well, most of them, but no, I didn't say that. But it was all about coming out for community. I said, glad you're here, and hope you learn along the way. You know, there's some other things that God has for you, but looking for that community. Some will do it at a bar. Some will go talk to the person cutting their hair. But they're looking for a community. And so with that, take that idea of to your workplace and to be able to say, hey, let's all do meals. So-and-so just had a baby, and create that environment there for them. Let's move to our third one, costly hospitality, which is really just going to point back to the other two. Way back in Leviticus 23:22, when you harvest the crops of your land, do not harvest the grain along the edges of your field, and do not pick up what the harvesters drop. Leave it for the poor and the foreigners living among you. I am the Lord your God. So a very stiff and direct command from God way back in the law of the Old Testament. But understand what was happening kind of behind that. If you owned the field, like Boaz, if that was your field, see, they lived off their harvest. You get to harvest in fall, and you get to harvest once in spring, depending on what you're planting, but those were the two times to be able to do this. And what God is saying to do cuts into your proceeds. This costs them. Again, this also ties back into the hospitality of the workplace. As you do those things, on your lunch break, instead of just having it to yourself, or working through your lunch break is investing in others maybe during that time. That's the idea behind that. But home hospitality is also costly. One had called it, one article that I read talked about having open roof hospitality. And I bring this up because we talked about it just last week. It was from our story last week of the four men. Four friends who brought their paralytic friend, and they couldn't get in the house, go up on the roof, pull open the roof, lower him down in front of Jesus so Jesus can heal him. But it tore up the roof. They tore up their roof. And so with that, it's kind of thinking that through. Do I have an open roof policy in my home? Am I willing for my home to be filled? Sometimes refashioned as you're moving furniture around, oftentimes torn up so that people can meet with Jesus. I know Larry and Donna had done a Bible study in their home for years, and it was literally pulling couches out into the garage. And I mean, they would do, because it was packed inside of there, they would have to move all the furniture around and everything else. Am I willing for carpet to be stained, a plant to be knocked over, coffee to be spilt, so that laughter can be the music of my home? When we first moved into our home in Temecula, we've been in the same home for 37 years now. And when we used to do middle school and high school, when we were doing first middle school before high school, had them over, and we had this, it was ugly carpet, but it was brand new. It was a brand new home, and it was light blue. I don't know, it just came with the house. But anyways, light blue carpet all the way through the house, and middle schoolers with hot chocolate, not a good combo. I don't care how you try, the stains do not come up. And so I just remember we just wiped out our carpet in there. But it's those kind of things. But I like that, so that laughter can be the music of your home. It's costs. Hospitality costs. Our last one, gospel hospitality. People are almost always loved, not argued towards faith. Great quote. So true. That people are not argued into the kingdom. I don't care how great your apologetics are. Apologetics are important. That's giving a defense for the faith. But with that, that never saves a person. It'll be genuine love. It'll be hospitality, authentic love that we're talking about, right? See, we often think the life of a Christian starts with conversion and then brought into community and then discipleship. But in reality, though, it usually starts with community. It happened that way for both Kelly and I. We were invited into a home Bible study where we built authentic, hospitable relationships with other Christians before I was ever saved. Matter of fact, I was a Catholic all my life, as many of you know, and with that, I started going to this Bible study, and I was learning the Bible for the very first time. I thought it was just fantastic. I mean, I would hear different things in sermons, throughout the years, but with that, we were opening our own Bibles, studying a chapter of it, looking it through, hearing it taught, asking questions, and doing that. That was all brand new to me. I remember coming home and my mom said, "Is that a Catholic Bible study you're going to?" And I said, "I don't know. I'll ask them." I really didn't know. They were just really nice people, and I was really getting a lot out of it. And so I went and asked right in the middle of Bible study, "Hey, can I ask, is this a Catholic Bible study?" And my friend Raul, who was leading the Bible study at the time and was very influential in leading me to Christ, he had said, he says, "Well, no, it's not specifically a Catholic Bible study. We actually, they're all here from different churches, and everyone is welcome." And I thought, all right, I'll tell my mom that kind of thing is what I was thinking in my mind. And so that's what I did. "No, Mom, but everyone's welcome and we're studying the Bible." Maybe now more than ever, sharing our faith is going to look like hospitality. Keep that in your mind as you're thinking evangelism, which really isn't a New Testament word, but Mary sharing your faith, and with that, so with that, maybe now more than ever, sharing our faith is going to look like hospitality. What a great way to do it. Think of it as a warm dose of welcoming hospitality, which will often take many by surprise and possibly open the door for opportunities to make disciples of Jesus. So how do I start? Literally do this. Greet everyone you see. Opening the door for somebody at Starbucks, whatever it is, just greet everyone. You'll probably get into more conversations if you say hello to them with a smile, right? Greet everyone you see. Pretty simple. That's harder if you're an introvert, but ask God for grace and strength. And remember, everyone you meet is eternal. Think of C.S. Lewis that said, "You never met a mere mortal. You've never met someone who doesn't bear God's image." Everyone you meet will live for eternity, either in heaven or in hell. Every human you meet will live forever. As soon as you're born, you're eternal. You will live forever. We need to think about that. And they're made in God's image. Get to know people. Take an interest in them. I like this phrase, let your inner curiosity out by asking open-ended questions. Here's one that's hard for all of us because we all like talking. Listen to them. Actually, listen to them. That's the key in getting to know people. Listen to them. Listen to their story. R.C. Sproul used to always say, everyone wants to talk about themselves. Everyone wants to tell their story. So simply ask them that and be quiet. You don't have to give yours. Listen to theirs. In John 1:14, out of the Message Bible, it says it this way. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. And dwelt among us is what the ESV says, and dwelt among us. And he moved into the neighborhood. I like that. Jesus left his comfortable home in heaven and came to us. Jesus ate with sinners and showed hospitality. He was a host and turned common things like loaves and fish into these massive meals. And then in his death, he left us a family meal, the Lord's Supper, to remember him by. Hospitality is simply turning strangers into friends. It's opening your life, it's opening your house to those who believe differently than you. This little paragraph here in my notes, I think, is very important for us. See, they often are the outliers or the outsiders to our Christian culture and our belief system. But don't run away from differences, or for those who think differently than you or look differently than we do. Jesus always moved towards those people. God moved towards you and I with radical hospitality. We love the outsider because we were the outsider. I'll wrap up with this. Many in the Christian field would consider the best book on hospitality. The gospel comes with a house key. I haven't read the book, but I was listening to a number of Rosaria Butterfield's stories and a podcast that she did, and it makes me want to read this book now. That's why I put it behind me in case you want to grab it. Rosaria was a tenured professor of English at Syracuse University, whose specialty was postmodern critical theory, and was a very outspoken lesbian on her campus. She was writing a book basically about how Bible-believing Christians are the worst and the source of all patriarchy. And to write this book, she had to do research and to actually spend some time with the Bible-believing Christian that she had grown to hate. But she had to do it for her writing. She wrote a very angry op-ed many years ago against the movement called Promise Keepers, right? That Christian men's movement still exists today. And a local pastor named Ken Smith reached out and very gently said, "I read your article. Thank you so much for your thoughts. We'd love to have you over for dinner." Since she had to do research anyway, she said yes. And then listening to her tell the story is just like, it's free research. And so didn't have to pay him to get it. So she decides to go over his house. She enjoyed the conversation, started coming over to their house on a regular basis. I'm going to pause here. And in the podcast, she says, for 2 years. She didn't get saved right away. You're going to hear about what takes place in her transformation. 2 years. She started coming over every week to their house. I just thought that was way to go, Pastor Ken Smith. She found their life and family and their faith to be more compelling than anything she had ever come to experience over time. And through that process, she became a follower of Jesus. Today, she's a brilliant writer, foster homeschool mom, and a wife to a Presbyterian pastor, which is awesome. And her basic case is this, that the LGBTQ community does a way better job at welcoming strangers than the church. And she builds from there. And that we as a church, we need to recapture the ancient practice as a heritage and not a fringe idea for extroverted people with a nice home who like to entertain, but as core to following Jesus. Whew. Okay, we'll wrap up with her quote where she says this: radically ordinary hospitality, which I like that, radically ordinary hospitality, those who live it see strangers as neighbors and neighbors as family of God. They recoil at reducing a person to a category or a label. We all do that. This is God's image reflected in the eyes of every human being on earth. Those who live out radically ordinary hospitality see their homes not as theirs at all, but as God's gift to use for the furtherance of his kingdom. They open doors. They seek out the underprivileged. And they know that the gospel comes with a house key. Is that good or what? And that's the name for her book there. I'm going to end right there. I think we have time for, Romulo, are you coming back out? Yeah. All right, we're doing it. Hey, let's all stand and I'm going to pray. Okay, God, we understand it to be a command. And now we need help. Just as you gave to the disciples, give them something to eat. You're speaking the same to us today. And as they immediately started making a bunch of excuses, and so do our heads, they kick into gear of all the reasons why we can't, shouldn't, scared, don't want to take risks, whatever. And you said, bring them to me. Oh God, that we would just be faithful with that would bring the stranger, the foreigner, the refugee, the next door neighbor that we haven't met. Whoever it is, Lord, we pray that we would be just open and available and simply saying, God, would you show us the stranger today, this week? And God, would you help us to be able to respond with a smile, with a conversation, maybe some coffee or a lunch or somewhere else, but we would start those relationships and bringing them to you. Lord, we need your help with that. In Jesus' name, amen.